Veturi, my company I mentioned, we've seen, I think, something like 2,000 startups or pitches or business plans or ideas or whatever in the course of close to 2 years now. And often when you talk to people, you ask them, well, have you spoken to the market or the customer, potential customers and so on? And the answers are, no, we haven't, because we're afraid that someone will steal the idea. They often approach us first by sending an NDA, which we refuse to sign. We only sign NDAs with the school or some special research institutes or like large entities like that, but we don't sign NDAs with individual inventors. That's the case with most VCs, I think, nowadays as well. And in general, I think NDAs, the whole culture is a bit bizarre if you have to always introduce yourself by giving an NDA first. However, that said, you need to remember that if you have something that you think that you might or will patent, you need to be very careful about that. So you shouldn't, I mean, you probably know this better than I do, but it's quite strict how and how you should or could talk about things that you want to patent before you have filed the applications. So that is kind of the only kind of provision there. But apart from that, so stealing the idea is a very common fear. It's not a Finnish thing, it's a universal thing. People are afraid of someone stealing the idea. I'll come back to that, why I think it's not such a big stress factor or threat. The other reason why people often don't want to talk about their ideas is that it's not ready yet. And this is common also with some companies that I've been observing quite closely. They have already some technology. They might have a customer, like a pilot customer or something, but before the big launch or before the phase of going international or something, they don't want to go out and talk about it because it's not ready yet. They still need to do this feature, that functionality, add that, do it on Android or whatever. And it's because it's not ready. And the idea is that you stay in your workshop or closet or your office or something and code and code and code. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I just want to comment on that I understand those people because it's partly we have been trained to do so, that in school we have to have it perfectly when you give it to the teacher, otherwise you get reprimanded. And also when you go to a customer with an unfinished product, like we have done, then you get a lot of shit, you need this feature, that feature, we won't use it, you don't have this, you don't have that. So it's kind of comfortable not showing it to anyone because then you don't have to receive negative feedback.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, school is very much, I don't know, I went to school in Finland, I don't know, most of you, or some of you at least went somewhere else, but the Finnish school system is very much focusing on errors. Like, I can still write very well French, I can put the accents in the right direction or whatever, I still can't talk French because it doesn't focus on that. But anyway, yeah, you're right, it is. But I think that's part of the whole startup life or mentality is that you should be prepared to hear a lot of negative feedback, criticism, well, shit, whatever you want to call it. It's part of the game. And so if you just want to hear praise and positive comments, I don't think startups it's not really the right environment for that. But another thing you often can hear is that we're doing something so new that no one will understand it before it's complete or something, or somehow that it's such a big thing that we need to first finalize that before we go out. And I think that's, in some cases it might be true, but in other cases I think you should rethink how you do it and how you talk about it and how you, even when you're launching it, how you launch it. Because if you think of Google, for instance, today, it's everything and anything. It's anything from maps and mails to social, I don't know, everything. But when they started, it was a very simple box, just search. And I think everyone should, okay, now they have massive resources, even then they had fairly big when you started seeing them. But the point is that you should start very small. You might have this massive vision, but when you start talking about your idea, and especially when you start launching it, you shouldn't start or go out with some massive unfinished thing. It's better to finalize something, and something very small, limited niche or targeted, and then later on expand that. But going back to the stealing of the idea thing, and this I think is very important. Ideas are not very valuable, they don't really matter, they're not important. That's what I'm kind of challenging you with. I think many people are very focused on the idea. They think, I mean, if you go to see some of the business plan competitions, they're all focused on ideas, trying to find something which is so unique that no one else has found it before. If you think of many other, I mean, there are lots of settings where people are focusing on the uniqueness of the idea. And I would challenge that. I think that the uniqueness of ideas is not core in most cases. I probably have mentioned this example to some of you already many times in the past, but if we take the idea of taking our photos, some text associated to those photos, and put them on the internet and link these together. It's not a very unique idea. I don't know if it's interesting, but you can have different implementations of the idea. You can have IRC gallery in Finland, 500,000 users and declining rapidly. You can have High Five, Xing, LinkedIn, Facebook, Orkut, whatever, you name it. There are hundreds of those examples. It's basically the same idea, but they're very different, and the execution is really what matters. And I think that is really important to notice that all of them probably started with a fairly similar idea, but then they started branching in lots of different directions, and the implementation of the idea is quite different when you look at where they ended up today. There's of course a lot of luck, there's some VC funding involved, lots of other things as well, but it's very much really about the execution. And if you think of your idea today, what you have today, I would challenge you and say that what you have today is most likely not what you'll have 2 years from now. Because the idea will evolve, it will change, and there are classic examples of this in the literature. If you check out, for instance, PayPal, which is transferring money today by email. Anyone who has an email account can send money to someone else. You're familiar with this. But did you know how it started? It was about beaming money from one Palm Pilot to another Palm Pilot. They got money for this, but it didn't really fly very well. They just changed the idea, tweaked the business model, and now it flies. There are countless examples of the same thing. And this is not about you should wait till you launch or you're ready. You should start testing the idea already now. And that is really the key, the essence of this customer exposure. You should talk about your idea, go out there and just talk. And it's important because you get feedback from lots of different people, and it starts evolving. What you first thought might be really the killer thing, it might be so that people are not really interested in that. But there's something else. If you turn it around, look at it from a different angle, or you might find out that this target group that you had in mind is actually not really interested in what you're doing, but there might be someone else who is really interested in what you're doing.
Yeah. One of the best examples is Viagra.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was
It was a blood pressure medicine.
Yeah, blood pressure, yeah.
And it didn't really work that well on blood pressure. The side effects were very interesting.
Yeah.
And the rest is history.
Yeah,
There's,
so,
of course, like you said, countless examples.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, post-it notes. There was a crappy glue that someone had invented and didn't work, but then they figured out, yeah, you could use it for something else. There are lots of examples of this. And not just inventions, it's all kinds of things where you really need to test it. Okay, there are interesting quotes also in the literature about not talking about your idea or testing it because the consumer opinion doesn't matter, or they're so dumb that they don't really know what they need. There's a famous quote from Henry Ford, the guy who did Ford Motor Company, the cars. He said that if I had asked my customers what they wanted, the answer would have been faster horses. So, yeah, okay, it's a classic counter-argument against this. If you're doing something which is so cutting-edge, disruptive, new, they don't know, that people don't know that they need it. And it's true. I mean, there are lots of examples like iPod, for instance. I don't think that people knew that they needed iPod or iTunes or iPad or something. But, well, I mean, I have all of the toys, and yeah. But,
Well,
yeah.
I had thought about the same thing. It's like revolution and evolution. The iPhone is like revolution, but
Yeah.
then they usually say, oh, where to cut, copy, and paste. So it's an evolution from there.
Yeah.
So if the idea is so unique, yeah, the Ford was right. It's like, okay, faster Fords. Here's the car. And it's easy with the client further to develop the product, the shape.
Yeah.
So, yeah, in a way, when I somehow not tend to go and talk about like, okay, I have this weird new stuff, but I'm talking to get what the problem is and figure by myself the solution, and afterwards go with the solution. Here it is.
Yeah.
And then talk how we can make it more better. That's
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. It's not about going to the customer or potential customer and ask what you want. You can do it in some, yeah, I mean, or you can just observe them, like how they use certain gadgets or certain software or services or whatever in their daily lives, and how you could maybe improve that. And you could talk about like how many hours or minutes or whatever they use today for doing something or accomplishing a task, and then try to figure out if you can help that or improve that. I mean, there.
building personas. Yeah,
Sorry?
There's a design approach, like building persona.
Yeah.
Who's the person? Who's the imaginable person? who's
Sure.
doing this thing?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of approaches to this, and I think the important thing also is not just about customers, because you don't necessarily know who your customer will be. So I think that, like for instance, in one case I've been talking to one guy or one company, and they are very kind of strict that we want to talk to these kind of people or these kind of companies because they are our target market. And then I'm trying to explain that, well, actually, it might be beneficial to talk to a much broader audience, even if you know that these are the 5 companies you want to talk. Maybe you should talk to 20 companies around it, just to understand how the market works, how these 5 companies fit into the market, and things like this. Because if you're too focused on, I mean, okay, this is a paradox in a way. Focus is very good, but I think before you know where to focus, you should be very broad. And then later on you need to kind of map the terrain before you can kind of plan what you do and where you focus.
Like in the beginning, you were telling about B2B, B2C.
Yeah.
But if you want to work with the B2B, you have to understand how they further work with their clients.
Yeah.
So how you improve their product.
Yeah, I mean, okay, this B2B2C is a very good example because, like, you can have 5 companies of 10 or 15 or whatever, 50 companies in the world who you would like to sell to, but each one of them have partners, they have suppliers, they have lots of different, there's an ecosystem. And the whole thing is about, and then they have these end consumers who use the product or service. And it's very much about this whole thing mapping the ecosystem. Because if you don't really know your place in the ecosystem, what other people are doing, what other companies are thinking, it's very difficult to really innovate in a vacuum. You need to be part of an ecosystem. And I think this is one of the, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but well, it's a fact of life. If you come from a country like Finland, people are always complaining, but yeah, the market is somewhere else, and we can't fly, we can't afford to go there, or there are lots of excuses why they decide to develop the thing in a vacuum, and then when it's ready, then they get money from someone, and then they go to the market. But still, I think there are lots of innovative ways of still bootstrapping, i.e. not spending very much money if you don't have money, and still talking to the customers or talking to the market, or at least trying to figure out how the ecosystem works. I think there are brilliant examples coming from small countries, like periphery countries, who have grown and are doing quite nicely, actually. I think, for instance, Estonia, I'm not sure if you're familiar with a company called Fortumo. It's a very small company. I think, well, at least 2 years ago when they started, they were very small. But they have a very intelligent payment solution for, well, you should look it up, It's an interesting company. They started there, very much local business, no funding really, but they still managed to somehow map the market. At least they started kind of where they are, and then they expanded gradually, and all the time when they are like very small, they just talk to the immediate neighborhood and somehow acquire knowledge of the next surroundings. And as they expand, they kind of have all the time their feelers or the kind of the antennas out there to the next sphere where they want to enter. I think the interesting thing is also that chance, chance I think is the word, plays a big role in many cases, because again, this is I think an example that I've shown to some of you at least. I think there are two ways of running a business or building a plan or a company. I would call them motorboating and sailing. And if I'm boring some people with this same example, bear with me. I think I have something new to say as well at some point. Anyway, the idea is that motorboating is very much this, that you have I'm in point A and I want to go to point B, which is there, and I just kind of, first I do my planning, and then I go straight to point B, and that's it, I reach my goal. However, well, it's nice if you have a lot of fuel, you have a nice boat and so on. It might work in some cases, but at least in real life, in my experience, it's more like sailing. You're here, you need to go there, but to reach the point, you might need to go kind of, depending on the wind, depending on the currents, and depending on lots of different things, you might need to go kind of zigzagging to reach it. You have an idea you want to go there, but it will take time, and in the meantime, you need to go kind of zigzagging. And this is very important to notice that running a startup, or building a startup, is very much like this sailing, and the kind of this climate or the wind or the currents and so on are very much what's happening in the market, what your competitors are doing, how the technology is advancing, if there are new legislations or regulations or whatever. Lots of these things are affecting the business where you are. And if you're not aware of these, you might end up in just hit a stone, or whatever analogy you want to use here. And that's why it's really important to talk to the market. And again, I think there are lots of different parties you should talk to. So a good example, or good way to start this is you should start mapping your ecosystem. Draw it on a board, for instance. So who are your customers? You can, I don't know, if you're doing a consumer service, it probably potentially could be every single human being on this planet. But again, you can probably, within those, the wider population of human beings or companies, you can probably find some segmentation there. And then also, you can also find some different roles for these players in the ecosystem. So some are customers, some are potential partners, some are like potential channels, some are thought leaders or influencers. A very interesting part of the market is journalists, nowadays also bloggers and analysts, who are very much kind of in the market looking at the ecosystem, and they are very much aware of what's happening. And those are the people you should also get to know too. So this customer exposure is not just about talking to the customers to understand what kind of gadget or service they'd like to have, or what features or functionalities they'd like to have, but it's also immersing yourself in the ecosystem and first mapping the different roles of the different players there, but then getting involved with them and get to know them. Because you need to be in the ecosystem, part of it, if you want to provide a meaningful service or a product to them. Have you tried to map your ecosystem? Like who your customers are, who the influencers are there, what does it look like?
Well, we have.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Have you actually drawn it, or how do you, yeah?
Yeah, I went through all the competitors, the main affiliates, the main sponsors, the main brands, the main sources we can get for content, and then we just to try to figure out what the hell it is we do and where we bring value to who.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it something that is it a static document, or is it alive? No.
Keeps being edited every day.
Yeah. Because I think that's really key there. You cannot.
Like, just now we found another source that's actually saving us a lot of time. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's really often people think that we've done our business plan, we've done our marketing study or marketing plan or whatever, and that's it. Then we can go. But it's always a kind of an iterative process. You start with, I think one way of, I don't know how many of you are researchers in background, but how many are actually? Or is there anyone researching?
Yeah, research assistant.
Okay, well, it counts. So, I mean, if you're doing like natural science, it's very much about doing hypotheses, testing them, and well, if it works, fine. If it doesn't, then you kind of reiterate or formulate other hypotheses and test them. So, running a startup is in a way, it's very much like that, or you should see it like that. So you have some hypotheses or thoughts about what your customers will be, who they are, what they look like, what they think, and who the other people in the ecosystem are. And this could be the first mapping of it. But then you need to test this. And in most cases, when you start testing things like talking to people, then you figure out that, it might not be that these groups are exactly formed like this, like your initial hypothesis or initial thoughts, and you need to change that. Or you need to start, like Ramin mentioned, you hear about new players, or you discover someone, and you need to add that to your map. And that is really essential, that you don't think that these are static, carved in stone kind of pictures, but it has to be updated and alive all the time. Have you done any kind of exercise like this?
Yeah, sure, but I think we still need to do a lot of it, every day, and talk more to the customers.
Yeah. And I think that there are lots of different ways of doing this. I don't know. You probably, all of you seem to talk to the customers, so I'm not sure. Yeah, sorry.
So really, how do you find like real potential customers to talk to who aren't biased in your way, like people who are not your friends but would still somehow be interested?
I don't know. What do you do?
Games.
Games. What kind of games?
Well, sort of interactive social games.
Okay.
I suppose that our target audience is like a bit more mature, like people who are like around 30 or so.
Yeah.
It's not the average age of gamer.
Yeah.
So that's our target audience. So I guess it's just find people who are 30 years old and join them.
Random people. I don't know, it's a way to just, walk out there.
I don't know. How did you come up with this idea?
Well, obviously we could talk to the people who are part of the, in a sense, the scene from where this idea comes from.
Okay.
But those people are going to be positive towards our idea, and getting those people is useless for us since they'll just say, wow, this is the best idea ever.
Okay.
We can have 200 people who will say yes to our idea, but I mean, if we already kind of are somehow connected with those people, we need more than 200 users at the end.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It depends on your business model.
So.
If they're very rich 200 people and they really like games.
This business model requires preferably like 100 million people.
Okay.
12,000 money, in fact, but yeah.
But I mean, okay, but you have it seems that you have a hypothesis that there's a group of people who are, above 30 and who like to play games.
I like to play high quality games and don't have the time for it.
Okay. So, all right. And now, but you have enough evidence already from some group, or is it just your intuition? Or how do you said that you spoke to some people, like you're close.
We haven't spoken to 200 yet, but I mean, we spoke to some from our group of friends and who, I mean, like, obviously, and among ourselves, we're a group of 6 people, and so we kind of all have this issue that we are professional game developers, and we don't have time to enjoy enough games. That
There's a lot of studies also on that. I mean, there's a lot of like stats that you can find that actually show that there's this huge segment that people who grew up with Nintendo and then bought Super Nintendo and then bought PlayStation and bought PlayStation 2, well, these people were born around early 80s, and now they want to buy the older games. And there's a lot of studies on that.
Yeah, I know there's studies in that, but the point was, how do I get like into contact with people who don't want to be nice to me?
Well,
Come here.
That's quite weird. It's like I recently read an article about the surveys. There are tools which allow you to study your audience. You pay for everyone or every question, and you get an answer. It's like grid. Okay, it's not an open question. Well, they could be, but it's not face to face. It's internet. There was one success story. The guy told that he tried, like his hacker, he got this and checked, and he thought that the results were amazing. For example, he didn't know that the potential customers are more men than women, and he was thinking that it would be vice versa. And afterwards, also he knew that he don't need a bunch of features for this particular product, but it was only the online question. And there's a Surveo, I guess the product is one, and there are several others.
What is the name of
Survey.eo, Surveo. But there, you can Google up and they will show up some other cases.
But I mean, how many people you have in your Facebook, for instance? Friend, do you use Facebook? Okay. How many people do you meet per week, like face-to-face human beings?
Most of them are the same people that are.
Okay. But how many people do you meet per week?
events for a lot in a week, sometimes 5, sometimes 50 or 100. So
Do you talk about your idea to everyone? Do you test it?
That is true that we haven't been doing that for everyone.
If you go to dinner, what did you do this weekend? Did you talk about your idea?
I do. Yeah.
Sorry?
To focus on that, obviously.
Yeah, but I mean, it depends. I mean, if you're trying to sell to, I don't know, nuclear power plants, maybe talking about it in dinner parties is not very beneficial. Maybe it might be, I don't know. But I think in your case, when you just know the demographics roughly, I think you just need to talk about it. Then you can do lots of surveys. Sorry, you had a point.
No, but I think it's partly the same that we discussed already in the morning. That of course, since you're in a business and consumer, and it's a large number of potential people, then you basically have to pitch it everywhere. Everyone you meet. How about this? Are you play games? You want to play this? And blah blah blah. Like here, I mean, we have barbecue on Wednesday. There's going to be 50, 60 people. They are not game developers. They are not from your community. So just give them a sausage and ask them a question or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
But
it's like,
if you're in B2B, then it's different. Then you don't have to talk to so many because the customers are bigger probably. And there, I strongly urge you to figure out these major industry trade shows, for example, because that's the place where you meet the right kind of people. Because then, if you do like a soldering solution, it's useless to go to the street and talk to the people because they don't understand what it is.
I have tried several times.
It's a bit different.
People look.
The whole process reminds me of a scene from Fight Club when there was like, you have to, the next assignment is to go and start a fight with a stranger you don't know. It's the same time. It's like,
yeah.
okay, for tomorrow, go and start a fight with a stranger. It's like,
Yeah,
no.
be prepared to be beaten. But it's like, I don't know, if you have a kid or like just a newborn child, the only thing that people who have a newborn child is usually they talk about the kid. So think of this as your baby. And I mean, just bore people to death about with your idea. Or, well, okay, to be more positive, talk about your idea, test it, wherever. I mean, there are these events, these around the boot camp or the venture garage. There are lots of other type of events where you can meet people and just test and talk and talk and talk. I think, I don't know, I mean, there are lots of also conferences in the game industry. I don't know how interesting a market that is. Of course, you can go to test your idea there also and see if you can find some potential partners or some, I don't know how you plan to distribute your product, but I'm sure that you can find lots of people to talk to. But it takes a while to get into the mindset that you actually are comfortable about talking your idea constantly. And not just about talking, like telling the idea and then leave, but the whole idea is to engage the people in a conversation. So you maybe have a very short, whatever, a blurb that you want to test the people with, and then listen what they say. And it doesn't need to be that you have, you don't even need to talk about your idea that much as such, as an opener, but it might be that you can start with, like, do you have nowadays time to play, or do you play games? You can start with questions like this and try to understand who these people are, what goes in their head. You might find that they used to be playing games a lot, but now they're frustrated because they have a job or they have kids or something, and then you can relate to this, and then you can talk about your idea. So it's not always just going and blurting your thing, but it's more, you need to, I think the whole thing is about this exposure. It really boils down to somehow liking human beings and getting along with human beings and really enjoying the interaction and talking to them. Because if you don't like that, then it's a bit tough. Because then the alternative, and this is very often what happens, people, is they're afraid or they're shy or they just don't like other people or whatever, they decide that I don't want to do this, it's better to do it on the internet, or I can Google all the answers, or maybe we can pay a consultant to do it, and then we don't need to do it. Well, I mean, it's true.
Yeah, well, some people are idiots. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's I think it's so, there are lots of different reasons how you can kind of avoid doing this. And of course, like Johan mentioned, if you are in B2B, you probably don't want to talk to everyone about your idea. You kind of need to be a bit more selective. But trade shows are very good. And I think that, again, my background is more in B2B. But a good example of talking to people is you go to a trade show and you meet lots of, say, exhibitors there who might be your competitors. Just go there and don't talk about your idea, let them talk about what they are doing. And that's also a very good way of practicing to actually listen how the other people in your ecosystem talk about what they have to offer. Doesn't mean that you have to lie who you are. You just go there. In most cases, these trade shows there are lots of these very eager people who just want to talk and talk and talk about their thing. Just go there and listen. And it's really, I think the whole thing about this exposure is more about listening than talking. I've many times now I've said talk about your idea, but it's actually listen to people's reactions when you talk about the topic or the problems or the issues or something that they face, and then just listen.
I would say sort of a rule of thumb is that pitching is for audience of more than one. Can you pitch? But this is what we do here a lot. But when you're having a one-on-one or 1 to 2 or something, but more of a one-to-one type of thing, then you don't pitch or preach. Then you say, explain your idea, and then you listen. You ask the questions, you listen what the reaction is. That's what's more important than to blurb, like you said.
Yeah.
And that's what I've noticed, that eager entrepreneurs who really love their idea, they are very much on the preaching. They're like preacher men. They preach, and they never listen what someone says. So don't get distracted. Always listen.
It's not a monologue, it's a dialogue.
Yes.
An extra question actually to you regarding the pitching session that we had, like the first one where everyone was here. So that was 3 minutes of pitching and then 3 minutes of questions afterwards. So in such a situation, should we consider those questions something that we should be sort of listening to and having a conversation with the people who are asking the questions in a crowd, rather than trying to answer to the questions in a preaching manner?
Well, in an event, the thing is that someone asks you a question, you have to answer it quickly and precisely, because there's a very, very limited time and
Can I add one
no
thing
time
on
to hover around.
If I can just add one thing on that. You never, when you're pitching at an event, people ask you questions, never get in a mode. Because like if you're saying you get in the pitching mode and answering the question and you pitching whatever, never sound argumentative. Never sound like you're trying to justify your thing. Because you lose credibility.
Yeah. And no
instantly.
ping pong. If someone disagrees, you just take it and continue.
Yeah.
I
Don't
mean,
try
that's
to
fine.
convince them.
If they ask a question and you don't know what to say, you say, I don't know, but I'll look into it. And the next question. Never get into argument. That's the worst you can do in a situation like this. You make a fool out of yourself. I mean, if I disagree with him and we start arguing here, it's very uncomfortable for all of you here. You're just watching us sort of fighting. And never ever do that. So if there's an asshole in the crowd, as there normally always is, ignore him. But that's different. When you're really trying to get the information on one-to-one basis, then you can have the arguments and discussion.
Yeah,
Never
but
a
it's-
problem.
But it's very much a dialogue. I mean,
Yes.
it's kind of, I think you need to really also be able to trying to find the word, position or decide how you talk about your idea. If you pitch to an audience, it's a different situation from having a one-to-one talk in a, I don't know, at a barbecue or in a random encounter somewhere. You need to adapt how you talk about your idea in these different situations. There's one, or there are lots of groups that you should talk to, but I think one which is really interesting is these kind of influencers, like, okay, nowadays especially bloggers, but also journalists and analysts. By analysts I mean the Gartner Group or the IDC or, well, there are lots of Forrester or whatever, especially if you're in the B2B scene. These are very, very influential and interesting people to talk to. But even in B2C, bloggers and journalists are interesting.
Exactly.
And I think the main reason, or there are many reasons why you should talk to these guys, if you get to bump into them in a conference or somewhere, or even if you have an email conversation with them, you can read their blogs and then find some point that they make on their blog, and then you can start commenting, either on the on the discussion board on the blog or privately comment and engage in this kind of dialogue. And there are several reasons. One of them obviously is to get to know the people in the ecosystem and make yourself known to the other people in the ecosystem and learn from them. It's also these people, they have this immense amount of knowledge of the ecosystem that you don't have. And they are very good kind of nodes in the ecosystem or hubs where you can get a lot of interesting insights. They know all the people. In the case of games, they probably play all the games. They're reviewing them. So these are very valuable people. They can make, in some cases, introductions, but they don't do them from day one. You need to get to know the people first, then you can get maybe their trust, and then they can introduce you to some other people. And in general, they are very knowledgeable of what happens, what the competitors are doing already before things are in public. Because usually if you're just following passively, I mean, you can be very actively reading, but if you're just not in a dialogue, but if you're just reading stuff on the internet, for instance, or listening to some podcasts or whatever, you're usually seeing, especially if you're looking at what VCs are investing in, if that is your way of figuring out what the market wants and where the market is, you are anything from 6 months to 2 years late in where the market really is. Because what the VCs are funding today and announcing in a press release is something that the dialogue with the VCs started 6 months ago, and the product or service they started developing it 2 years ago, in most cases. And if that is your kind of evidence where the market is, it is crappy evidence. You should really get to the primary sources, i.e. the consumers or the customers, or the kind of the earlier the better in this chain. Then I have a funny kind of or weird example where you can get also kind of not customer exposure, but some sort of exposure to the ecosystem and interesting information. In my previous job, we were selling this multi-million something software package for financial institutions. And there was one, because I was in charge of marketing and communications, I was always bombarded by requests for, do you want to put an ad in our news or in our magazine, like a trade magazine, or do you want to come to a trade show, have a booth or whatever? All of these people were calling me, and I usually just ignored them in most cases because I hated advertising, and we didn't want to advertise. Well, very limited advertising budget, we spent it elsewhere. But there was one guy in one of the trade publications who was selling ads constantly. He called me like every month. And I took his calls, and I always talked to him. We had a 15 minutes call. He was usually based, he's still based in London. And we had a very interesting exchange of ideas, because he he was a trade publication, and he always called all our competitors and all the other people in the industry as well. So, and he was very eager to get our account. So he spent a lot of time telling how the industry is doing. I learned from him what the competitors are doing, what the customers are doing. He was one of the very interesting sources, actually, or kind of the very unexpected, interesting sources for information. And it didn't cost me. I mean, sometimes we put an ad in his magazine, but it was very seldom. So I didn't actually have to pay him anything. I just listened to him. And I'm sure that anyone and everyone can find these kind of sources who are kind of the most unexpected. So whatever you're doing, you should not only focus on, this is my market, these are the 3 people I want to talk to, I don't want to talk to you guys, because you might find out something really interesting there. Then there's a topic kind of around this, which I maybe briefly hinted at, but let's go more in detail in those, like market research and focus groups and all those, because that is often some kind of, if you look at the books, how they tell you how you should do things, it's very much like first you need to do a market research or something, and then maybe or a focus group, and then you do the next steps or so. And at least in my limited experience, I'm not a big fan of market research or focus groups, or for that matter consultants doing these kind of things, because it is true that in some cases you can learn interesting things through a focus group or market research, but I think the main argument against using consultants is that you are not talking to the market. You pay someone to talk to them. So you have an interface, someone who is intermediate, someone who is actually filtering the information. And although it might be nice that you get, I don't know, 3,000, 5,000 from Tekes or Tuli, and then you can have a consultant do a research, and then you have a nice report, and then you forget it, or you put it in your investor pack or something, and you say that 73% of the respondents were thinking this, and 82 were of this opinion, whatever. And if someone actually would go and start poking at those results, like how do you know who are these people? And in most cases you don't really have the answer because you haven't spoken to the market. It was a consultant's view of the material that he or she gathered. And I think that, well, personally I wouldn't do it. There are very few cases where I would go for an external person or party doing the market research for you. It might be so that I think that the reasons or the cases where you would want to do this is that you don't have the access to these people, but a consultant might have the access. So for instance, if you need to survey the CEOs of the 50 largest companies in the US, assuming that is your target market, it might be indeed a bit tricky for you to go directly to that market. And then there might be consultants who have access to those. But in other cases, or in most cases, I would recommend very much you do the research yourself. You might have a consultant help you formulate some questions or help formulate your thinking, but you should expose yourself mostly to the market. Can I bother you, and can you actually give some sort of insight how you are figuring out your customer, what they want? How do you do it? Because you seem to have what I've looked at and heard, you seem to have a very kind of clear idea what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you come up with this, where you are today? What have you done?
So okay, the very, very first step was how we got the idea, and it came from a real need. So this is a very simple thing. I'm starting to get extra fat and extra gray hair, meaning that, and the problem is I don't do enough activities besides being on the computer. That's a real problem I have. It's a real problem that people, as they get older, they have more and more. I started to realize that more meaningfully. That's one thing. The other problem was that in practice, there was one Sunday with Varun, it was really sunny, and we both wanted to go to the beach, but we didn't want to bother asking out there into social media who wants to go to the beach or whatever, and then we didn't want to call up 30 people and know who wanted to go to the beach. And I figured, okay, we need a service for that. So that was the initial, like, okay, there seems to be a need or something, because we need this, let's see if there's other people.
There are 2 individuals on this planet who have a need.
Who apparently have
maybe a third.
Something like this.
And I would say that this is really much, we have totally different kind of needs.
Yes.
So I have a kid, and Sundays I would love to meet new people in the park, and I love to make with the kids. And on the other hand, I know myself, when I'm talking to a lot of people, realize that in Berlin, in the hotel.
Oh, but yeah, I'm getting there. I'm
Okay,
getting there. My point is that
Just yeah.
how we got to realizing that. Then I started asking pretty much everyone who came in garage, do you have this problem also? And they said, in a way, they said yes, but for different things. So I don't do enough sports, I don't meet enough people, I don't want to go in a different city, I don't find things, etc. There's all these cool new activities out there, I can't find them. I'm like, okay, it's sort of the same need, but from different angles. Then I started asking for all different advisors, so people who make similar apps. So we spoke with Tina Aspiala, for example, from Italy. That was really, really helpful because she sort of destroyed the approach we had, and then we had to rebuild it and all. Then talking to random people, like actual random people, and asking them, like, do you have this problem? So we did that twice. And then we asked also I asked all my contacts that were live on Facebook and Skype. So there's about 150 people, like, do you have this problem? And in a sense, they all said yes, because they're all in the age range that we're going for and stuff. And now we're just going through the event organizers, the sponsors, the channels, and ask them, like,
Spinning in
yeah. So we ask them, like, okay, what is your problem? Because, like, you're answering partly the problem for these people, but how do you do it, and what are the stakeholders you have, and how can we increase your business? So we started talking with a bunch of them, like something like 10 of them so far. Like people who do salsa lessons, dance lessons, sports classes, martial arts, stuff like this, and ask them, like, okay, what problems do you have finding these people? Because they say that they can't find you, basically, and how can we improve that? And so we're starting to sort of map that and find one angle that would make everyone happy, and that's where we are right now.
And the most profitable angle also.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, because we could.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. It's very.
I'd like to bring in another view for all of you, is that you always also need to be a bit careful on when you ask customers for feedback. Because one of the things I've noticed, especially, again, my experience mainly from B2B side, is that companies are very, very eager to implement everything that the customer says. And if you're in a product-based business, you have to be very careful, because if you have 10 customers, they all want different things. And suddenly you end up either being sort of a slave for all of them, so you're actually not doing a product development, you're doing project work. And that's a different business. So my rule of thumb has always been that if you ask 10 questions and you get 10 issues from each, for example, you need to put them in an Excel sheet and see which one gets the most remarks. That's the most important thing, etc., etc., etc. Otherwise, you can never prioritize efficiently what you really need to do. Because if you talk to 10 customers, you get 10 different answers. And that's something you need to be careful about, because everyone always say be customer oriented and listen to your customers and all of that, but you can overdo it as well.
Well, that's why you need to talk to so many people to really understand. I mean, if you talk to 5, or first 1, it sounds cool. 5, they have slightly different needs. And then if you start rushing and doing all the 5 things that they've listed, if you meet other 5 people and they have additional 5 requests, it doesn't work like that. You're not, unless you're building a consultancy, or integrator or something. That is different. So when I'm talking about customer or consumer, whatever, customer exposure, the idea is not to rush to implement it. It's like you talk to people, then you analyze what they say and try to understand how you can actually incorporate all of the stuff that they've input or told you into one coherent package.
I'd like
Because
to ask your advice on this,
Yeah.
because like one thing we realize is that 15-year-old girls have this problem, 65-year-old retired people have this problem too, right?
Yeah.
And it's just, and then CEOs who, whatever, C-level people travel a lot have this problem also, but like in very different things. The core technology is exactly the same, it's just we recommend them stuff and we target it and we show it to people. Obviously the channels that we're going for to reach these people are different and the activities are different. So we would recommend golfing or whatever to people with higher income or people who want to network more, things like this, right? And not to the teenagers. And we're trying to determine right now which segment would make more sense for us at the moment. How do you get around that yourself? What kind of advice do you have there?
I think you already answered the first part of it,
Right.
which is, to quote Nancy Reagan, just say no. So it's very important to know who you say no to or what you say no to. So if you want to, you should not spread yourself kind of everywhere and very thin. Because I think this is one of the very early things I mentioned, but I reiterate is, if you have a big vision, it doesn't mean that you need to reveal it in one go, like Google or Facebook. If they're everywhere doing anything and everything,
Sure.
doesn't mean that you want to do that. So I think what you should do is really think of your go-to market. So you can list all the different segments or all the different use cases or all the persona or whatever you want to call them, all those different stereotypical users or markets. There are different ways of looking at your product or service, but selecting a few subsets or even many of the subsets and then putting them in some sort of an order, like first we do this, then we do that. I'm not an expert on your field, so I can't say if the 65-year-old CEO is better than the 15-year-old teenager, but I'm sure that you need to, and of course what you're about, and in most cases other consumer products as well, it's very much about word of mouth. It's also in B2B very much about word of mouth. So if you find a market which is, well, this is a tradition, I don't know, are you familiar with Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm? Okay, well, if some are not, you should definitely. This is one of the important books about technology marketing. It's very, it's old, but it's still valid. I think it's not a very heavy reading, and I think even if you're not into marketing, you should still read it because it's not really about marketing, as in doing logos or I don't know, fancy jingles or something. It's really about how you position or how you do your product strategy, how you do the product marketing, how you position yourself, how you differentiate, and many of the other things there. The key point there is, or one of the kind of early key points in the book is about what is a market, and the way they define market in the book is a group of individuals or companies who, when they are making a buying decision, refer to each other. So it's basically about word of mouth in a way, another way of putting it. So for instance, doctors, like physicians in New York and Zaire don't form a market, because a physician, like a brain surgeon in New York, when he's buying a new product, like a new, I don't know, a laser or something thingy, he doesn't talk to the guy in Zaire about all the different laser thingies out in the market. But he might talk to the other guy in New York, or he might, I don't know, maybe they go to conferences and the guy from Dallas and Kentucky and those brain surgeons, they meet and they talk about laser thingies. So that forms one market. So in the case of, like for instance, FundRank, which is the product of these guys, you should select these kind of markets as your first, well, the way you select it is very much about how you can create these kind of word of mouth effects. Because it's very much about, if I get an invitation to FundRank one day, and if I'm somehow your target market or the first target market, I get it, I use it, I like it, I start to talk about it to my friends or those people who I might be interacting with. And the same thing I think applies to, it's not just about B2C like consumer products, it's also the same thing in B2B. Like my previous company, we were doing financial software. So we had very clearly defined target markets. We had Fortune 500, i.e. the largest companies in the world, their corporate treasuries, which is one market. Then the other market was central banks, which was actually our best market because it's a very limited market. There's a limited number of people limited number of central banks in the world and limited number of people in those banks. So it's a very manageable market. So also if you're thinking of a consumer product, you should not think that your market is all the people on the globe to start with. You should go into these segments, and within those segments, or even a micro-segment, you should build some sort of a understanding of how they work, or what makes them tick, and then get into that. I think you're in the dentistry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Have you done this kind of exercises where you actually try to figure out who your customers are?
Very much, yes.
Okay. Yeah, because it's kind of makes sense.
It definitely does.
What
yes.
kind of experiences do you have there?
The problem is that we have had some problems with actually nailing down the final solution, kind of, because there's so many different needs for different segments. So that's one of the problems we are dealing with now.
And I think there, without knowing too much about what you do, you should probably also think of the. Are you familiar with the concept of whole product? That's
we
also.
discussed that in the morning.
You did. Okay, that's in the book as well. So the idea is not just the little, the thingy you do, the laser thingy or something. It's the whole product. But you discussed that already. So you need to talk to not just the customers, but also the suppliers of the accompanying thingies that you sell with your laser thingy or something, and really map the entire ecosystem, because you're not, in most cases, you don't do every single bit and piece in the thingy, but it's a company. Anyway, I'm just trying to be generic here. So it's not just mapping the customer or like in your case, the dentist who would be using the thing, but maybe some channel partners, maybe some other companies who are already selling stuff into the operating room, and so on and so on and so on. And really
They are
understanding
kind of
that.
our main competitors, but
Mhm.
also could be our best friend.
Yeah, definitely. So it's really about understanding this whole thing and how they map together. Just going back to what Ramin said earlier, how they did with FundRank. Have you done similar exercises like what he described? Have you done that for your own product or service?
Like talking with the client?
Yeah, and talking to random people and talking to.
Well, we are in B2B.